I think all the descriptions that I've been labeled as a female, from the entrepreneur to the artist, the diversity of a mold breaker, that came across as a ball breaker. But that's not really true. I think those are the narratives of society, and most of us do know that the system is built for men. And I love men, but I think the exclusion that women have, being almost forced or rejected within the system due to layers of narratives, etc., I have, over the years, definitely become more assertive, kindly assertive. And I think the truth always sets you free. So there's such a thing called an inconvenient truth. But I think all entrepreneurs, both women and men, face challenges. But this patriarchal system definitely does give women like me labels. There is no doubt about that. I won't be the only one that's had labels. Many, many females around the world have been labeled, even if they're efficient artists or somebody like Mrs. Merkel, that's highly acclaimed, totally efficient, selfless, runs the entire country as a collective's well-being and not her own personal show or her concave show, her collective, in other words. So, yes, I've been described as a lot of things. Some are enjoyable, some I've smiled about, because that actually indirectly gives you a little bit of fuel. There's nothing like a little bit of resistance for entrepreneurs. My concept as Jenna of True Wealth isn't just what most people assume, financial prowess or success. I think wealth is almost 4 pillars. It's many more, but 4 major pillars. One is your health, your emotional and spiritual well-being. Your fiscal prowess is vitally important, whether you're a woman or a man, because that is almost a defense for you against a very, very bad system. So I think fiscal wealth, if it's compounded, big word that, and not wasted and not manipulated, is very, very, very important. But it's not the alpha and the omega, because often you find in exceedingly wealthy people, there's a barrenness to their soul, a barrenness to their family units, and money is power, can cross-mutate into narcissistic behaviors. And that's not good for a business, it's not good for a family, and it's not good for a country. So I hope that kind of explains fiscal wealth, 100%. I wouldn't be without it. But there, again, it lies what is fiscal wealth. To me, coming from Bez Valley and then Kensington, a small amount of money became a lot of money that was valued. For somebody growing up within a projected and possibly a very affluent family, small amounts of money that might be to me or any of you out there become vast amounts of money. So there's a perspective that one has to look at. Remember, money is only talent in a form of exchange. So I think we must all be mindful. Money used just in greed and power is the ultimate of destroyers. And I don't want to start mentioning Albert Einstein and his inventions, etc., etc. That is power when you can collate it on its oneness and cleave an atomic bomb. I think we must definitely start, women and men, start to look at wealth in a different way. And also wealth is a delayed gratification, because anything that you're growing, just like a child, it doesn't come out of in utero and suddenly become bolt. It's got to be groomed. And as I said, wealth only isn't about money. We've got to get and establish all of that to create a good society. As an artist and entrepreneur, I wasn't really afforded on a platter you becoming an entrepreneur. This was a desperation of leaving home young in my matric year. My father was a taskmaster, and bless him, he passed recently. But the lessons that I got taught have served me invaluably through my life. When I was younger, and well symbolized to me because living and in the conditions we were living, there wasn't TVs in those days, so there was no reference point of wealth. The reference point of wealth was my father giving me these lessons, like the harder you practice, the luckier you became. He got me swimming from 7, 2 hours a day. By the time I was 8, it was 4 hours a day. If I look back, these invaluable lessons of those disciplines and things made me deeply desire some fiscal so I could get out of the situation. So I saw wealth, particularly in those days. And the older I got, just being subject to one or two of my aunts and uncles that were also removed from us because they were the wealthier side of the family and the educated side of the family. My father was also dyslexic. So the bottom line is he only had one brother who was a CA. So there was always the comparison, look at you, look at your brother. And my father clearly was damaged by things that had happened to him in his childhood. Money, per se, became my savior. And I came from the poor side of the tracks. So money, in my perception in my early years, was never to waste or to throw in front of people. It was absolutely a protectory valve to be able to eat and get around. With wealth, my major mentor was really my father and my grandfather. And I think because our family lineage had really grown up poor and unschooled, my grandfather always used to believe the better you are schooled, the better your outcome. But then, as I said, with the reference point of his son having dyslexia and me having partial dyslexia, the investment from very young was, my dad was a plasterer, by the way, plasterer. In those days, you could plaster, and our population could only be Duggar boys. Now that's patriarchy yet again, of the exclusion of others, and that's what I always witnessed. So often on a weekend when I wasn't at school, I was on my father's building sites. So my grandfather used to give me these enormous lessons of, Jeannie, do you see that building? When I bought it, it was 230 pounds, Jeannie. Jeannie, look now, we don't have pounds and tikkies, we have rands and cents, but this is now worth 4,500. And I watched over the years, something was bought for 230 pounds, one day being worth R1 million. So that set about the delayed gratification of what you invest in and what you nurture and what you look after and what you compound, and cutting away all the abuses of where money runs out on silly systems, like buying a new car every year. If you want fiscal wealth, you do not go into commodities that devalue. You go into commodities that build. So property is one of those. Gold investment commodities, platinum, you will always get a rise and a flux, always. There's an algorithm that runs through life. So fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of beings, they forget history. History always repeats itself. It's a question of when. So your education, the way you tithe, the way you see money, the way you value beings, because remember, it's an exchange. Those are important factors in life. I found, coming from where I've come from, I've definitely got way further than I ever anticipated. And when I say that, there is no difference of fame and money. I don't believe I'm wealthy within the fiscal terms. I'm wealthy in the spiritual terms and the way I handled the little I had with investments that grow. My perceptions have actually changed quite vastly because I think your experiences of a system and money and life in general and marriage and children, just remember women, that were businesswomen. You don't get usually with your partner, oh, sweetie, you're working 18 hours a day, let me get up and feed the baby. Do you know what I'm saying? Women that are in those positions have got to do vastly more work. So there's that kilters on the back. But in another way, when you are doing that and growing wealth and things like that in the wee hours of the night, you might be absolutely exhausted. But it starts testing your ability again to know you're stronger than you think, number one. And then secondly, in the wee hours of the night, we lunar beings actually, telepathically, different notions reach you. Now that can create wealth again. Do you know that? Because a system is like an abattoir. It only gives you certain lines to go through. So operating nocturnally sometimes stretches the imagination or gives you the gap to adapt things. So wealth, for me, has changed vastly because as I've got older, no matter how much you protect your wealth, there's always somebody to skim it out for you. And there's vessels, I call them vessels, but they're not, they're structures. So whether you in a PTY or a trust, there's always somebody to extrapolate it from you. I have realized as I've got older that if you're a woman or a decent quality man or being, you almost need to build wealth with one accountant in the hand and one attorney in the other, because you've got to protect your wealth. And if your expertise is being an entrepreneur or building money through medicine or anything like that, your competency is not always on the gambit of protecting those assets. We've seen Steinhoff. We have seen before that Enron. These have collapsed global systems due to manipulation and greed and just what goes on in the world today. It is happening in every pocket and we can see it. So definitely my concept of that has vastly changed to my experience. Wealth creation, I definitely think is an enabler of happiness. I wouldn't want to go to sleep at night knowing that my back was fully to the wall. I think it's good when you're building wealth, you've got to have those challenges. If you borrow money, you've got to repay it. But clearly when your debt is paid off, you feel better about it. But it's not going to give you money, cannot go in a love bank. It's your conduct. What you give is what you get. Same with money. Your talent, your wealth, how you make it. It's what you train to do, and the better you do it, the more money you get. There are industries like what I'm in, the art-centered industries, where your primary driver is not money. Because if your primary driver was money, you wouldn't be talented, because you'd only be looking at the commercial aspects of that. And I really do urge everybody, we're not just about fiscal prowess. We are beings that are built in three parts: mind, body, and soul. This physiological body is only your carrier. Your mind is not your brain. Your mind is ethereal. It's a unseen quantum. And your spirituality, your soul doesn't rest here. It's also around you. So we've got to be more mindful, because the world's being denuded, destroyed on a global scale. Now, what's the good if some of us or all of us have got money, but we don't have air, we don't have the sea, we don't have life, we don't have species? What is that about? So wealth checks are vitally important things. As I've got older, and some of my mentors started primarily very, very young, because my father, when I was younger, said, for discipline and so that you can get strong, do you want to be a tennis player? Do you want to be a golfer? My father loved golf, but he couldn't afford golf. And Gary Player grew up in Kensington, and my father grew up in Bears Valley and then Kensington. So I think being a girl, he would like me to have a golf club, but I just didn't have a swimming pool, so I wanted to be a swimmer. So Gary Player became my mentor. I hadn't met him. As I got older through the years, I was delighted to meet him. And literally, all of my father's training, you see that man, he hits so many balls. You see that man, he's doing so many press-ups. And then I suppose because I was a girl and not having money, I used to love going with my gran once a month to what was called John Orr's in those days. And there was a cosmetic counter called Estee Lauder, where Karen Graham was up on big billboards, and she was so gorgeous. And then I wanted to become that. So luckily, my grandpa said to me, well, why don't you start researching Estee herself? And that gave me little threads, and I'd never met her, and she became my mentor. So most of my mentors that I met as I got older, they didn't even know that they mentored me through books and through tracking them. So that was phenomenal. I think people don't have an excuse. If you're poor and you come from poverty, doesn't mean that you can't get educated, because you can get informally educated. Books are still around. We're lucky with these Android devices now. We can more or less reach everything. My wealth is not mine. None of it. Because I donated to a trust, which means I don't own anything. But my legacy will be defined out of what the beneficiaries do with what I provided, that I worked my whole life for. I think my message to anybody out there that's young, up and coming, or wants to be up and coming with huge challenges, the earlier you can start to believe in yourself and not go necessarily through a bad system, and to work day and night with your passion. Because everybody wants to seek balance. It doesn't exist. You must put in the energy to attain, and then you can start balancing your life. But if, like girls do, they want to work, they want their hair done, they want their nails done, they want to go to gym, they want to sort their families out, etc., there's not enough time for the investment to what it takes to build wealth. Unless you're a trust fund baby, or somebody gives you the money to go and compound, that you know the rules, it normally takes accruing time, etc. And I think to youngsters out there, you might as well love what you're doing, because you've got to do it long. So your passion is vitally important. Also, when you leave school, don't just bounce straight into another institution, because it's a sausage machine. Have a break and go and work for other people free of charge. Free, because you're going to get exposure. From exposure, you start to get IP. From your IP, your life will take a new course. But your passion drives your prize, drives a whole bunch of things, actually. And you might as well be happy doing something. And often, when you're younger, your parents, wanting the better things for you, want to prescript what you should be out of their own proclivity of, I want you to be a doctor because I wasn't. I want you to be an accountant because I wasn't. You have to be who you are. If you don't make mistakes, you will never be successful. If you're scared to make a mistake, you won't be at the starting block. Be kind, be real, be truthful, but do try, and don't be scared to make a mistake. And by the way, the last major thing, readers are leaders. It might have taken me 4 days longer than anybody else in this country to read a book. But I read it, and then I reread it, and then I reread it. Build in what you need within your faculties, and try and enjoy the process and be kind while you're doing it, because it's a long way up to the top, and believe me, it's a very quick way down if you're doing the wrong things.